Cool. So let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us today. This is a webinar on how to co-buy a home with friends, family, or a partner. My name is Matt Holmes. I'm CEO and co-founder of CoBuy. You also have Pam Hughes, my co-founder, and my mother. And together we started CoBuy. We're going to be talking to you about the process of buying a home together. We're going to be talking about co-ownership. The first 45 minutes are going to be presentation. We want to make this a little bit more interactive than past sessions, so please feel free to throw things on the chat. We're going to be sharing pro tips and real life examples. We're going to keep it super informal, so feel free to ask questions on the chat. We've put our email addresses on the chat as well. So let's get started. Awesome. So a little bit about our backgrounds and why we're here talking to you today. My background is in investment banking, specifically debt capital markets. So I was looking at interest rates, credits, financial markets, and then some mortgage-backed securities as well. It's really a financial background. I've always enjoyed living with friends and family. And so when I was 17, I moved over to the UK, lived in the equivalent of dorms there, and then lived with my best friend, Ernesto, who's from Mexico, for about the next 10 years. In between, had a few diverse living situations where I had groups of friends. Today, I actually live with my co-founder and mother, Pam, who's co-hosting in a multi-generational household. And so both of us really live co-buying and co-ownership. We enjoy being with other people. And we started CoBuy around that idea. We're going to share this story a little bit, but first I'm going to introduce Pam.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. And thank you for being here today. So my background, as it says here, is finance, investments, real estate, and building homes, actually. I have been a student of real estate and investing literally since childhood. I learned something and look to learn something new virtually every day. I hope you learned something here today. I'm sure you will. And I'm passionate about how real estate can be helpful in building wealth and financial empowerment. So I look forward to talking to you all today.
Awesome. So before we get started, let's define some terms. When we say co-buying, we're talking about when two or more people who are not married to one another decide to buy a home. So that can be friends, that can be family members, that can be a group of friends, that can be two couples, whether or not they're married. So co-buy groups can include a married couple, and it's also irrespective of who lives in the property. So whenever you got two or more people teaming up to buy a home together, and the outcome is co-ownership, and that's when, as we say, two or more people who are not married to one another actually co-own a property together, a home together. The problem is co-buying is hard to get right. There are a lot of moving parts, and we're gonna look at those. There's a spectrum of possible outcomes when we think about this. When we think about, on the one end, success, what constitutes success when we're co-buying a home, co-owning a home together? Well, getting on the property ladder, becoming homeowners, creating wealth, so the financial benefits, social benefits. As humans, we like living together, most of us, or we at least enjoy each other's company. And then ecological benefits as well of living together in terms of consumption, and energy usage and things of this sort. On the other end of the spectrum, what does pain look like? What are the outcomes that we want to avoid? Well, losing time, financial expense or loss, credit contagion, where our personal credit score is impacted by the actions or status of the people that we co-buy or co-own with. Bankruptcy in that same vein, stress, any sort of relationship issues from disagreements. In the worst case, that could end up in litigation if we're not able to resolve those things. And then forced sale or repossession of the home if we're not making our payments on time. So when we look at the horizon of home ownership, we have to think about, in a standard situation, the average tenure, it's called tenure of home ownership in America, is 10 to 14 years. And so the tail is long when we're thinking about co-ownership. It's not just about purchasing the home, it's about everything that happens during that co-ownership period. So today, this is a breakdown of what we're going to cover. Pam's going to talk to you about buying a home. Then she's going to give you an overview of co-buying. And then we're going to give you a useful framework for how we think about co-buying and co-ownership before we jump into an overview of the co-buying process. If we have time, we'll look at a few case studies, but we really want to get to the Q&A at the end as well. What you can expect to walk away with is a better understanding of how it all works. And in fact, when we look at the questions that we get across all forums, the number one question we get is, how does it work? So you'll walk away with a better sense of what co-buying is all about and how it works. You'll also walk away with that framework for approaching co-buying intelligently. And we're going to be sharing insights and tips, lessons that we've learned over the last several years, both personally and professionally, working with literally hundreds of co-buyers all across the country. Legal stuff real quick. Our lawyers want us to read this to you, so bear with me. This communication is provided by CoBuy Inc. This communication does not contain legal, accounting, tax, or financial advice. The legal information is provided for general, informational, and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional advice. Accordingly, before taking any actions based upon such information, we encourage you to consult with the appropriate professionals. The use or reliance of any information contained in this communication is solely at your own risk. Thank you. So very quickly, quick background. I shared with you, for those who just joined, my name is Matt Holmes. I'm co-founder and CEO of CoBuy. Just over 5 years ago, I moved back to the US from the UK to Seattle. And I moved in with my mother and my stepfather, Pam Hughes, my co-founder, who's on the call. We decided to buy a home together. And that's actually a picture of the table where it happened, my mother and my stepfather. Our motivations were both social and financial, like the vast majority of co-buyers who we've worked with over the last few years. And at that table, we had actually closer to 100 years of combined real estate and financial experience between us professionally. What was really interesting is we agreed on why we wanted to do this. So socially, it was something that we thought would be fun. It would be convenient logistically. We thought it would be helpful as well, as we were going to be working together. And then on the financial side, we saw a number of benefits. I think the most obvious one is that we thought, hey, we can split the down payment. We can split the mortgage payments. All of the bills and utilities will be split between us. And in fact, we were a group of 4 because I moved over with my girlfriend at the time. We saw that we could increase our purchasing power. And this is a concept called economies of scale. And it's really like going to Costco. If you're buying a single Coca-Cola at a 7-Eleven, you can expect to pay a higher price than if you were to go to Costco and buy in bulk. And the same principle holds true in housing. In fact, we've just written an article on this, breaking it down with numbers. So check out our blog if you haven't already. But we saw that we'd be able to increase our purchasing power, which would also increase our optionality. The access that we had to homes on the market would widen because we would have greater purchasing power. We'd be able to diversify our risk. There would be a lower entry point on an individual level for each of us, and we'd be able to start building equity as homeowners. What we learned, if we fast forward, is that this process is really complicated. Despite our backgrounds in real estate and finance, there's a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of unknowns, and a challenge is that you don't know what you don't know. Another thing that was immediately evident to me was that a lot of the real estate professionals involved in the residential real estate vertical are not qualified or incentivized to serve co-buyers or co-ownership, which is distinct and unique from the standard purchase, which involves a single person or a married couple. So this whole home buying process really wasn't designed for co-buyers, and that became apparent to all of us. And we also kind of learned that if this is difficult for real estate and financial professionals like us, this has to be difficult for other people. And that was the spark. That's why we decided to found CoBuy. We really wanted to improve access to home ownership and make it possible for all different types of people to become homeowners, regardless of whether or not they choose to live in a traditional nuclear household. So our mission is to make it easier to buy and own a home together intelligently, start to finish, and that's what we do. Very quickly, background, we founded in 2016. We were the first to pioneer this co-buying model. So this is a specialized model and a specialized process. Today, we're going to be sharing information, whether or not you decide to work with us. We're very much mission driven. We're family owned and operated. We are serving co-buyers in Washington, Oregon, California. Primarily, we are working on a select basis with folks in other jurisdictions, and we do have plans to expand. Last thing about us, which is really important, we feel, are our values. These are things that we hold at the top of our list in everything we do, and those are transparency, accountability, credibility, and accessibility. So that's who we are, what we're about, and things are working really well. We'll be sharing examples of the cases that we've looked at, and I think that's a big part of the value of today is we've seen a lot of different instances of co-buying, different combinations of people with different circumstances. And whilst every situation is different, there's a lot of similarities. And so we want to share what we've learned from those cases so that you can take that with you as you decide whether or not you're going to proceed. And if you do go through the process, we hope that it benefits your decision making. Our belief is that better information leads to better decision making. So Pam, I'm going to turn it over to you to go through buying a home.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. So buying a home is typically the largest financial transaction in a person's life. So it's really important to get it right. And this slide talks about the process at a glance. And this is looking back at data from 2019, which is a little more normal market than what we saw in 2020. And so we'll use that as a baseline. Typical purchase takes about 4.5 months. A consumer will view 10 to 12 homes, and there are 12 plus, usually more, professionals involved in the process. Once you get under contract with a home, it takes about 43 days to close. This changed dramatically in 2020, if you're making any comparisons. This process is what we call the standard purchase process, what most real estate transactions have been historically are with a single person or a married couple. And this is using our approach, which is a time-tested approach that actually is a little more logical than how most people approach buying a home. So this is what we call a simplified approach, and one that we'll talk a little bit more in our co-buying process. Suffice it to say, the process as it exists today is broken. It's inefficient. The incentives of the parties, the professionals involved, are not aligned with yours, the prospective home buyer. The process lacks transparency. And unfortunately, there are low professional barriers to entry. So there are many parties to the transaction who really are purely salespeople. And that's an unfortunate thing when you're buying such an important, doing such an important transaction. So we see stats, 75% of people surveyed feel overwhelmed in the process. Many sign documents that they didn't understand, many cry. And although many people say they're going to use the same agent again, only a small portion, less than 25%, actually do. So it's less than optimal, as evidenced by people's reactions. Also, in the process, the expectations, your expectations as a buyer and reality are often different. And that usually burns time. The price point at which you're going to buy usually is different than what you think. The condition of the home, size, style, distance, all of these things require compromising, particularly in today's very competitive environment. I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer. It's just the sooner that you understand the dynamics of the market, the easier the transaction process will go. So now let's talk about co-buying and distinguish it from the buyer's, the standard transaction. So real estate was designed for traditional households, married couples and single people. However, times have changed and the nuclear family is a declining circumstance. Unfortunately, while the demographics and the social networks have changed, lending, legal, tax and accounting regimes have not. So they're still adapted for these married circumstances or single people. So who is co-buying? It's everybody that isn't a single person or a married couple, friends, family, unmarried people, multi-generational, and combinations of those we see a lot too. So co-buying is a very complicated version of an already complex transaction. And what's different about co-buying is a result of all those things. You've got many more decision makers. You've got the logistics involved with that. You've got financing, which doesn't bend well to or easily to co-buy circumstance. You've got legal issues and risk. And the fact that, especially recently, most of what mortgage lenders are doing, about 70% of 2020 purchases were actually refinances. So the lenders aren't even really adept in dealing with co-buy groups. And as we found, oftentimes weren't even sure it was legal. It absolutely is legal and it's happening. So Matt's going to talk about the framework now for co-buying.
Awesome. Thank you. So we hope that that gives you a little bit of background on the fact that A, the home buying process is complicated. B, co-buying is a complicated version of an already complicated process. Now we're going to turn over to a framework, a way of thinking and approaching co-buying and co-ownership that can save you time, money, stress. I love this quote by Christine Tsai, and I cite it a lot. I want to share it with you. If you invest the time earlier to create structure and process around communication, planning, and goal setting, you can prevent missteps before they occur. This is huge because we talked about what a successful result looks like in co-buying and co-ownership and the fact that it has a long tail. Our money is at stake, our relationships are at stake, time and energy. Time being the one thing that we're never getting back. And so investing time around planning and really putting our minds to making informed decisions and building consensus is just a really smart way to go when we're talking about, for many of us, the highest dollar transaction we'll ever have engaged in, and also our home. If we unpack co-buying, as you may have gathered from the intro here, it's really bigger than just the transaction. We talk about co-buying, that's when two or more people team up to buy and own a home together. That's a complicated version of a complex transaction, but that results in co-ownership, which is akin to a business in many ways. And so for legal purposes, for most co-owner groups, especially when it's involving a primary residence, so at least one or more of the co-owners are going to live in the property. For legal purposes, it's often not going to be a partnership, a business, but in many regards, co-ownership is akin to a business. And it's a helpful analogy for thinking about this. And eventually we have the sale or exit. So they say that there are two things in life that are certain: death and taxes. And if we think about it in those terms, then the co-ownership arrangement is going to come to an end in one way, shape, or form, whether that's us amicably deciding to sell the property or one or more partners dying. It's going to come to an end. So we want to have an exit strategy, and we want to be thinking about co-buying in terms of co-buying, co-ownership, and the exit. We talked about how we're investing a lot. The one thing I'll say is that when we're investing our money to co-buy a home, generally it's on leverage. So the vast majority of co-buyers are taking out a mortgage from a financial institution. So we're not just investing our money, but we're investing the leveraged debt that we're taking on. And that's really helpful to think about as well, and just kind of highlights the fact that we really want to get this right. So our goals should be successful co-ownership, smooth sailing. We want to make sure that we're not wasting our time or needlessly spending time. For most people, we actually conducted a survey at the tail end of 2020, 415 co-buyers nationwide. And what we found is the number one motivation for co-buying a home is actually financial, closely followed by the social benefits. So we want to be thinking about how we can be preserving and building our wealth. We want to feel good about this, both personally and in terms of our relationship. And so with all of that, let's turn over to the things we need to be thinking about when it comes to co-buying, co-ownership in the exit. You have the logistical dimension of things, and that starts during the co-buying process, from how do we get on the same page about timing? How do we make sure people are signing or e-signing documents? If we're going to be viewing a home, how do we schedule that? That's more complicated as we add more people to the mix. The legal dimension. How are we going to structure this? What are the legal implications of 3 friends or 2 unmarried couples buying and owning a home together? The financial implications, both upfront on an ongoing basis, and that kind of turns over into the risks as well. What are the risks involved with co-buying, co-ownership? And that's a particularly multi-dimensional one. The social aspects, and then the day-to-day operation. So we talked about how co-ownership is akin to a business. We tend to work with folks who are co-buying a primary residence, so not strictly for investment purposes as non-occupant investors. So for the co-buyers we work with, when we say operations, how are we going to operate this home on a day-to-day basis? What are the roles, rights, and responsibilities individually? Who's going to make the monthly mortgage payment? We want to be thinking about all of these things, and the fact that they're all linked. And it's worth it because we want to preserve our relationships. We want to preserve our wealth. We want to preserve our sanity. And we want to really avoid those undesirable, unsavory outcomes. For instance, if there is a disagreement between 2 or more of us, if that can't be resolved in an amicable fashion, that could go to court. And just to get the ball rolling, that's $50,000. And so long as there is pending litigation, we're not able to sell the home. So the asset is what's called encumbered, and that can get really ugly. So we want to avoid these things, even if they're not likely. We want to plan ahead. So now let's look at the co-buying process. This is a snapshot expanding on that slide that Pam shared with you earlier of the simplified version of a home process. What I want you to take away from this is there are more steps involved in co-buying and co-ownership because of all those things we just talked about. But to tackle a big challenge, we have found over the last 4 years, the best way that you can do this efficiently, effectively, and feeling good about it is to break it down into smaller pieces. So that's what we do. And in our process, we found it really helpful to think about the co-buying stage part of this process in terms of 6 steps, if you will. The first one is planning and aligning. The second one is confirming readiness. And we're going to talk about some of these in more detail. That might seem like a trite step, but it's a really important one. We're going to share why. The next step is securing joint financing. Following that, we're going to go through the home search process, which is, if we unpack it, a little bit bigger than just searching for a home, and certainly more dynamic in today's market. It consists of negotiating and transacting as well. And there's an element of competition, especially in desirable West Coast metropolitan areas. Following that, we're going to structure and formalize our co-ownership arrangement. And the final step, which actually runs concurrently with step 5, is protecting. So we want to protect our relationship. We want to protect the home. We want to protect the money we have invested in our financial interests. So let's look at these in a little bit more detail. The first step, planning and aligning. What is this about? Well, this is really conducting our research on co-buying, on the process. Kudos to everyone on the call today. The fact that you're thinking about this critically ahead of time will be really beneficial. It'll make you feel better, and it's likely to produce a better outcome. So planning and aligning is about research. It's about discussing whether you're a group of 2 people or you're a group of 10 people. It's really important that folks discuss their personal preferences, their bright lines, what constitutes a deal breaker, and then that folks get on the same page. And so if we distill all of this, we like to have folks go through 3 high-level questions under which there are a number of sub-bullet points. But first off, deciding who's going to be involved in this co-ownership arrangement and in what capacity. So we see instances where there's an unmarried couple, but maybe one of the folks' parents is contributing financially as a non-occupant investor. So we want to think about that, and we want to be explicit about who's going to be involved and in what capacity. Second is, what is each person contributing? And the most obvious thing there is, what are folks contributing financially? But if we unpack that, it's really bigger than that. some of the financial elements like credit score. In a sense, you're contributing your credit score. Um, on the upfront cost side, you have the, how much is each person contributing in terms of cash to close, which is the down payment plus the closing costs, but also what's each person's income, because this is going to be considered when we go to get a mortgage. And it's going to be material as we think about paying down that monthly mortgage and all of the other costs associated with co-ownership. And then what are the shared goals? And this is huge and very dynamic, probably the biggest or the most often discounted conversation topic is, what are we looking to achieve? And one quick example is when Pam and I decided, along with my stepfather and my girlfriend at the time, that we wanted to buy and own a home together. We were on the same page about why we wanted to do it. We were mostly on the same page about all of the elements of the ideal home, of which there are many: location, size, style, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, etc. But there were a few things that we weren't on the same page about, namely how long we envisioned this co-ownership arrangement lasting. And that's okay, but that didn't come out until later. And the reason this is really important is if we're not on the same page about something critical, whether it's simple, like how long we envision the co-ownership arrangement lasting, or something a bit more complex, we want to tease that out. Because if that happens to be a deal breaker for one of us and it comes up after we've purchased the home, that could be a big problem. There are a lot of key decision points, and I don't want to overwhelm you with this slide, but if we think about the parameters of the ideal target property, there are many things there, as I just shared. But also the basics are really important. The basics of co-buying and co-ownership, the things we need to get on the same page about. We just talked about ownership timeline, but our motivations. Why are we doing this? If one co-buyer is thinking, I want to do this strictly because I want to own my own home, but another person wants to own a home close to work, or has accessibility needs, wants, or desires, these things need to be transparently discussed amongst the group, because that's going to make it easier during the process, and it's going to help avoid any disagreements during the co-ownership period. A number of financial considerations. Also on the co-ownership arrangement side, roles, rights, responsibility. How are we going to take and hold title, which we're going to look at in a sec, talking about structuring ownership. How are we going to divide ownership interest if we come with different amounts of cash up front, and if we're able to contribute different amounts on an ongoing basis? How are we going to handle the exit? And this is huge, etc. So risk handling. There are an infinite number of things that can go wrong. In all practicality, we've seen there's a finite number of things that come to fruition on the negative side in co-ownership. So if we think about those ahead of time and plan for them, things go better. We'll talk about that in just a sec. Pro tip on this stage, start with the inputs. So if I were to show you this equation and ask you to answer what's the value of Z, you'd say, well, I don't know, because there's too many variables on the left-hand side that haven't been defined. Co-buying and co-ownership are very much the same. We have to define a lot of these inputs. And when we talk about inputs, things like who's going to be involved and in what capacity, what is each party bringing to the table, and what are the shared goals for co-ownership? And that will drive our decision-making. Oftentimes we get questions, what happens if somebody leaves in year 2 because they lose their job? That's a difficult question to answer without having context. So as a co-buy group, the most efficient and effective way is to get on the same page about the knowns, highlight the things that need to be filled in, and then to get cracking, filling in the blanks. Transparency, it's super critical, often underrated, but if we look at the numbers in society, oftentimes folks in relationships and family situations are actually not transparent when it comes to financial matters with one another. Being transparent about financial positions, needs, wants, and desires is critical to the success of buying a home together, but also to that co-ownership period. And then involving structure, and that's what we're talking about here. So again, really happy to have you with us. Structure improves consensus building, and there's a lot of research, numerical research, that supports that. And so with so many things to decide and this big process, having a structure to approach it is the way to go. The next step is confirming readiness. When we talk about confirming readiness, there are kind of two buckets of consideration. One is viability. So are we on the same page about all of these decision points that we talked about as a group? Are there any deal breakers in there? Is there anything that would hold us back from continuing? And then there's the eligibility. So in a financial sense, are we likely to be eligible to borrow the amount of money we need in order to purchase the type of home that we've decided we want? If not, that's okay. But we want to tease that out before we proceed with the process, because we value our time. And as we said, time is the one thing we're not getting back. In competitive markets, if you don't have everything together, it's unlikely that you're going to be successful and reach mutual acceptance, so get an offer accepted. So it's a great idea to make sure that we perform this spot check. Is this a viable thing, and are we financially eligible? And are there no mitigating factors? So if there's two of us, we're co-buying, and we both have financial felonies from last year, we're not going to be able to borrow money. And that might sound funny. I use an extreme example, but oftentimes little details like this that come out later in the process can have a big impact on whether or not we're able to actually purchase this home together. So coming back to transparency, very important to tease that out. And the output of this step is we have a go or no-go call. Following the go or no-go call, we're ready to secure joint financing. And so because we've got clear around the inputs, who's going to be involved, what each party is contributing, what the shared goals are for co-ownership, we're in a good position to make an application for a mortgage. One thing I want to point out here is that the role of mortgage professionals is that of a salesperson. So great mortgage professionals are going to be able to provide education. They're going to be able to provide advice, but at the end of the day, they are salespeople, and it's helpful to remember that in our dealings. When we're going through this part of the process, securing a mortgage together, we want to select the mortgage of best fit. It's not all about just getting that approval for financing. It's not all about the headline rate. We want to delve into the terms. And as Pam shared with you earlier, 24% of people who go through the home buying process, so in any sense, buying a home in America, sign documents they don't understand. That can be really dangerous if we're signing documents that are pledging the home that we're buying to the bank. And when this is the biggest purchase that we've been involved in our life, we really want to understand the fine print. There are a number of terms, and when we look at the mortgage market, the landscape is vast. It's in constant flux. There are different products. There are different programs. A lot of them are geography specific. And it's not all about just getting financing. It's about getting a mortgage that fits our needs. Quick pro tip, lenders price risk. So that's the business of a lending institution. At a very high level, how a lender is going to assess co-buyers, which are different from a married couple or a singleton, as we talked about, legally that's the case, but also financially that's the case. They're going to look at three things at a very high level. First off is net income of the group, and that's cumulative. So more net income is all else better for lending purposes. Net assets, again, that's cumulative. Third thing is the individual credit scores, and they're going to base this assessment on the credit score that's lowest in the group. This is really helpful to think about. If there are four of us and one person has a very low credit score, this could impact our eligibility for borrowing, for getting a mortgage. This could impact the terms. And there are ways of dealing with this. Potentially that person may not participate on the mortgage, may not participate on title as a co-owner, but we want to tease that out early and understand what lenders are doing, how they're basing their assessment. That's going to empower us to go through this process more efficiently, more effectively, and ultimately get a better package. When we do have approval for financing, and I want to stress that it's important to get approval for financing before searching, again, because of the competition in the markets. If you find that home online and you fall in love with it and you go and view it, If you haven't gone through these steps of the process that we've talked about, first off, planning and aligning, building consensus, getting on the same page, which is super important, often overlooked, but also getting approval for a mortgage, then you're not in a position to actually make an offer on the home. And in competitive markets, which for the foreseeable future, because of the dearth of housing supply in the United States, in major metropolitan areas, desirable properties, we're going to see relatively competitive markets. And I say that relatively in context. You can expect any home that's priced well, that's in a major metropolitan area, to have multiple offers. Or at least we need to be prepared for that. So we want to make sure that we have that financing ahead of time and that we've gone through the planning and aligning stage. When it comes to search, negotiating, and transacting, oftentimes many people are sourcing properties online these days, which is excellent. And I think one thing that we see very often is that people discount the role of the real estate agent, and that is categorically a bad idea. You should be very stringent in the selection of your real estate agent, and here's why. They are representing your interest in the negotiations and the transacting. And this is a very high dollar purchase. There are many things that can and do go wrong in the wild, and we're entrusting the real estate agent to, in a sense, be the quarterback, at least for the transacting side. And if that person doesn't have domain expertise, experience, doesn't adhere to or share your values, isn't transparent, isn't communicative, a lot of things can go wrong. And we talked about success versus pain in co-buying and co-ownership, and I want to reference that here. So be stringent in the selection of your real estate agent, and again, understand the role of the real estate agent. A real estate agent is a salesperson. There is a spectrum of talent, just like any professional services industry, but we want to make sure that we're picking the best real estate agent for our needs, and that means someone who has experience in co-buying and co-ownership. We will talk a little bit later on about that, but just for the benefit of the call, all of the professionals involved in this transaction, we actually have sourced, vetted, and certified all of these professionals, and we've built a CoBuy certified ecosystem of professionals, so we can help out here. We want to make sure that we're communicating with our real estate agent, and we want to make sure that they're communicating with us. Next step is structuring and formalizing. So this is big. This is thinking about, in a legal sense, how we're going to structure our co-ownership. And it consists of several things. How we're going to take and hold title. If we do take title as, for instance, tenants in common, which is one format of taking and holding title to real property. We want to determine what our relative ownership interests are going to be. Oftentimes, whether it's a group of 2 or 5, co-buyers come to the table with different financial circumstances, different contributions. So sometimes folks decide they want to own or have different ownership interests in terms of percentages in the property. So how do we do that? Establishing roles, rights, and responsibilities. This is a big topic for an unmarried couple, co-buyers who are an unmarried couple. We often find that folks are less granular about defining roles, rights, and responsibilities. For a group of 5 friends, oftentimes you do want to be a little bit more explicit in defining things. And I give you an example there. Imagine a group of 5 friends in their late 20s who decide to buy and own a home together. What happens if one person effectively gets a new partner on Monday and on Wednesday that new partner moves in? Do they need consensus? Do they need to talk about whether or not this is okay with the other 4 co-owners? So establishing roles, rights, and responsibilities is something that's really important. The next thing is the exit strategy. Defining how, if and when the time comes, whether there's an amicable split or something unexpected happens, like a death or a disagreement, how are we going to unwind our co-ownership agreement or our co-ownership arrangement? And we want to get that in writing. We want to codify everything in writing, not so you can take your grandma or your friends to court, but when we get it in writing, it becomes explicit, and we avoid getting into arguments down the line, and it just makes for smooth sailing. At the end of the day, it also gives you peace of mind. Finally, on this slide, I want to say we want to engage a real estate attorney, and that's another thing that we can help with. This can be difficult. There, again, is a spectrum of talent, but we work with some of the best residential real estate attorneys, or rather attorneys who focus on co-buying and co-ownership in the nation. We do want to have one of them look over our co-ownership agreement and answer any questions that we may have that are specific to our case. Finally, protecting. So identifying and addressing those risks that we talked about. We talked about how there's an infinite number of risks out there in the wild. In all practicality, there's a finite number of risks. And some of those are disagreement. What happens if we disagree? What happens if we disagree on how we're going to handle a situation, on our rights with regard to the property, or how we're going to sell the property? Job loss, injury, these are things that can happen. Bankruptcy or credit contagion. We want to make sure that we're co-buying with people we trust, but we also want to be aware that if we haven't thought about things like borrowing against the asset, there are instances out there. If you Google, you can find instances of friends and family who bought a home together, where one person went out and took a loan against the home without telling the other people, and then got into financial trouble. And because the individuals involved are joint and severally liable because they took a mortgage out together, this has implications for the personal credit of the other borrowers, other co-owners. So thinking about these risks is really important. What if someone's not able to pay, or what if somebody dies? Even though it's not fun to think about, it's going to give us added protection and added peace of mind to identify these things, and then to understand how we can address them, how we can mitigate those risks. This is super important, and actually works really well. We actually just had an instance of two sisters here in Seattle who bought their first home together just over a year, and one of them just got a transfer for their job. So they're now selling, and actually they've just sold. And because they had a plan in place, things worked out really well. And financially and socially, they're very happy. How we can help. So I'm going to turn it over to Q&A now. What we do and what we specialize in is co-buying and co-ownership. Like I said at the beginning, this is a mission-driven company that Pam and I started, and we know what it's like to be a co-buyer. We understand the challenges firsthand, personally. We've also worked with many different types of groups, and so we've built a business around this to make it easier for people to buy and own homes together. All of these steps, all of this information, and all of the professionals involved in the transaction are at your fingertips when you use CoBuy. And so again, we call it our CoBuy certified ecosystem, which includes great lenders, real estate agents, attorneys, title and escrow professionals, CPAs, insurance professionals, and others. And so we bring everything you need into one place. And our goal is to help folks create successful co-ownership. We're not here to sell homes to sell co-ownership. We're here to help people who want to become co-owners to do it intelligently, efficiently, and effectively. And I want to point out real quick that we actually don't charge folks anything to use our service. So how we get paid is we engage in a commission sharing arrangement with the buy-side agent, the CoBuy certified real estate agent who represents the CoBuy group. We do require that folks use one of our CoBuy certified real estate agents. That's how we get paid. That's how the model works. It's intrinsic to the efficiency, the effectiveness. Pam can talk to you quickly about that. I know she has some input here. Pam?
I'm sorry, I'm actually reading a message. So you want to ask the question again? Oh, I can't hear you. You're
Sorry.
muted.
Usually you have some input around our model and why it works well, the requirement of using a CoBuy certified agent.
Yes, in fact, one of the things that I typically say and didn't this time is that in that standard process, there is a flaw in real estate that we've fixed in our approach, and that is that we have the CoBuy certified agent, lender, and all the parties work together as a team as much as possible. And that's one of the reasons why working with our folks is ideal. So somebody asked how CoBuy got paid. Matt mentioned that it is through a commission sharing with the CoBuy certified real estate agent. That is the one pro that we require that a group get connected with in the process and use. And the reason for that is they kind of quarterback the transaction itself, while we're the umbrella. We also highly recommend that you use one of our CoBuy certified lenders, at least as a backup. It turns out that most people end up using our lenders. We also recommend CoBuy certified attorneys. And we do that because we know that these people have raised their hands saying that they're ready, willing, and able to work with a more complex transaction that is CoBuy and co-ownership. We also have exposed these folks to the process that we have taken, which is different and streamlined and works better for everybody and ends up saving people money in the process. So that in a nutshell is why we do what we do. And we aren't paid by the other parties to the transaction, just the real estate agent. Someone said that they're not seeing questions I'm answering. I think it's a function of the
We'll turn over to Q&A now so we can just get
Okay.
the questions.
Cool.
Online. So we covered there's no added cost to use CoBuy. To get started, head to gocobuy.com, and there you can sign up very quickly for free, painless to our website. The first step, we talked about planning, aligning, building consensus. We have a tool called the CoBuy Wizard that makes this really straightforward. It's designed to be simple. It's designed to be informational. Essentially, you go through and it asks you questions, both details about who you are, what you want to do, but also about what you're looking to build in terms of co-ownership, who's going to be involved. The first person to sign up is designated on the site the group leader, whether your group is 2 people or 10. And as the first person who signs up to the site goes through the process, they'll be able to invite the other co-buyer or co-buyers in their group from the CoBuy Wizard to create an account. So it'll shoot them off an email and make it easy. The idea here is to get everyone on the same page. And so we found this tool works really well. If you want to check it out, sometimes folks even start the CoBuy Wizard. We've had people start it 2 years before they intend to purchase. We love that. Getting ready early is the best way to go about this. And we're all about education and information. Once again, we believe, and we've definitely found, when you have better information, you're able to make better decisions. So check out the CoBuy Wizard at gocobuy.com. You can get in touch with us, both of us and the entire team at hello@gocobuy.com, or email us directly, matt@gocobuy.com, MATT, or Pam, PAM @gocobuy.com. So thank you. We're going to turn it over to Q&A for a few minutes. I see the latest question from April is, would we sign a contract? Great question. We ask people to sign a buyer's agency agreement with us. And that is effectively saying that you're willing to use CoBuy and CoBuy certified agent for the transaction. This is important because, as we've described, it's an essential part of our model. It's how we get paid. It's how we're able to offer our value-added service to co-buyers at no added costs. So yes, there is a contract. It's very straightforward, and we found that it actually works really well. Another question from Tony: can you talk a bit more about financing? Are all traditional mortgage financing available, like VA, FHA, et cetera? Do you work with folks on multi-unit purchases? Can definitely talk more about financing. In the interest of time, I'm going to answer these sub questions real quick. Yes, all traditional mortgage financing options that would normally be available are available under our program. So we work with a number of CoBuy certified lenders. We help match people with the lending institution and professionals at those institutions who are best suited to their situation. So for instance, if you are military or ex-military and you're eligible for a VA loan, there are certain institutions that do this better, and we know who those are. So we're able to connect you with folks on the lending side who are excellent, who are CoBuy certified. They've been through our process. They have experience and expertise in co-buying and co-ownership, and who are versed in working with us, which is great for efficiency. It's also great for making sure that the transaction proceeds smoothly. I think this is a good opportunity also to point out that the litmus test, like we have set criteria for how we select CoBuy certified professionals, but the litmus test is, would we ourselves, knowing what we know about co-buying, co-ownership, the mortgage market, real estate, would we use this professional ourselves? So it's a very high bar, and all of our professionals go through a certification process that involves education, and we have an array of these folks in all the geographies we operate. In geographies where we haven't previously operated, through our network, we're able to onboard new professionals. So great question. Do you work with folks on multi-unit purchases? Yes, we do. So we're working on instances of that right now. In the past, we've worked on all different types of situations. Everybody's situation is unique. At the core, there are many similarities when you're co-buying. We've worked on situations, 3 friends who bought a home who added a unit on top is an ADU. We've worked on situations involving duplexes. We're working right now with several groups who are looking at duplexes and triplexes. So that's a bigger undertaking, but something that falls within our domain expertise. Great question. Another question, Pam, if you'd like to take this one, is joint financing the only option? Can financing be done separately?
That really depends on the details. Typically, it is joint financing. It really kind of depends on what the property type is.